it comes down to the fact, were you watching that thinking, if Graham Potter was in charge of Newcastle, we wouldn't be in the situation we were in?
Yeah, very much so, Mark. Thanks for having me on the show. I think one of the worst things about the game on Saturday night is I've seen that game before. So this wasn't a particular low point. This wasn't a bad performance. Or, to be fair to Brighton, you've got to give Brighton credit. We're very good on the night. But I've seen that performance at Brentford. I saw that performance at Sheffield United. I saw a similar performance at West Brom. I saw the same performance at home to Fulham. That is Steve Bruce's Newcastle United. That's not a bad version of Newcastle United and Steve Bruce. That is where he has got us to. And I think the frustration from a fan's point of view, we have been telling everyone that this has been coming. Newcastle United have been consistently dreadful under Steve Bruce. It's not a new thing. It's not because of injuries like the lads have been saying. Have the injuries affected it? Of course. But Callum Wilson played at Sheffield United. He played at Brentford. Listen, I love Callum Wilson. He's a fantastic player. We would be better with him in the side. But the bigger question is, why are Newcastle United playing games with no strikers? Why are Newcastle United playing games with Joe Linton in the side who's got a record of 1 in 33 in the Premier League or something crazy? They're decisions that Steve Bruce has chosen to make. They aren't forced on him. It's not Steve Bruce's, it's not injuries that have forced Steve Bruce to play this crazy diamond split striker system and leave Andy Carroll and Dwight Gill, the only two fit strikers at the club.
With respect, Alex, you're not party to what goes on in training and how these players are training. Now, I'm not saying they're bad trainers, but are you telling me that Steve Bruce would pick Joe Linton ahead of Dwight Gale and Andy Carroll if they were performing brilliantly in training? I don't think that's the case.
Well, Joe Linton, record signing, £40 million, one of the worst players I've ever seen in the Premier League at Newcastle. I've seen Dwight Gale score goals for Newcastle, both in the Championship and the Premier League. I've seen Steve Bruce consistently talk up Dwight Gale and Andy Carroll. I've seen Steve Bruce sign Andy Carroll, then give him a new contract despite not scoring last season. So it always comes back to the same man. And on injuries again.
So Steve Bruce, just to be clear, Steve Bruce would pick a player who's worse than Andy Carroll and Dwight Gale based on his performances in training because he doesn't want to win games. He would pick the worst team possible. I don't understand that argument.
No, that's not my argument, Chris. The argument, Steve Bruce picks a system, the player system, a diamond in midfield with often Isaac Hayden on the left of midfield, which is mental. He's now injured. Joe Willock, who looked brilliant when he came in, by the way, from Arsenal, looked like a confident, vibrant young footballer, full of energy. He looks shattered now after 2 months under Steve Bruce. He plays on the right of midfield. Then they play Joe Linton and Ryan Fraser as split strikers. Now, I've never heard of the phrase split strikers. The formation, which they dogmatically stick to, which was introduced to work around the three players you've mentioned, Wilson, Almiron and St Maximin. No one is forcing Steve Bruce to play this formation. Now, in terms of the players you mentioned that are injured, it's not the injuries to St Maximin, Wilson and Almiron that give Newcastle the fourth worst defensive record in the division. It's not those injuries which see Newcastle not only fail to take chances, but create them. The whole team is a complete mess from top to bottom. And yeah, would Newcastle be better with those players in the team? Absolutely, they would be better. But ultimately, what you're seeing from Newcastle United each week right now is a culmination not just of a bad month or a bad week or a bad training session. It's 19 months or whatever it is of a football team and a football club going backwards under a man who was last offered a Premier League job before he was signed by Newcastle in 2009. A man who was sacked by Aston Villa for failing to get them out of the Championship. A man who was sacked by Sunderland for probably going to take them down, 10 years ago now. The man is simply not capable of managing at this level. He talks about experience.
A man who finished 13th last season?
Yeah, he finished 13th last season.
Same as Rafa the season before?
I think you've got to be... I understand your frustration as a Newcastle fan, but if you're going to list the negatives, you have to then look at the positive things that he did. You mentioned the Villa. Yeah, we lost in the playoff final, so that could have went anyway. I'm not trying to protect it. I'm just trying to understand from a Newcastle fan point of view. But the reason why it's difficult for me to understand sometimes is because it just becomes very personal. Like you're explaining about the last 18 months is not good because of fourth. This is what we want to hear. We don't just want to hear Steve Bruce out is not good enough. Now you're explaining your opinion why. That's what we want to hear.
You need to listen to the True Faith podcast, Mega.
If he wasn't on 27 other podcasts, Alex, he might have time to listen to another one. But that's the slight problem.
You'd have to pay him.
I've always thought the Newcastle fans are probably the least demanding fans of all. They basically want a team that plays nice football, and that's about it. Newcastle fans, in my experience, do not have any kind of delusions of grandeur or of we must win trophies. It's basically we want a good football team to watch.
If you go on Twitter after a Newcastle defeat, some of the personal attacks on Steve Bruce is not right. I think if you want to talk about the football, you every right to make your opinion. But in terms of the personal attacks that he gets, you got to remember, he's human like anyone else. The question I was going to ask you, what is the solution? What in a perfect world, what do you want, Alex?
Well, to your first point, Steve Bruce says he doesn't have Twitter. I would say, I don't think the manager has to go on Twitter. But also, to back up my point, Steve Bruce, when he hits out a keyboard warriors and master steer, he's not talking about personal abuse. He's talking about criticism of the team's defeat at Brentford, the Championship side, who played us off the pitch. He's talking about his team's defeat at Sheffield United, who up to that point had not won a game or kept a clean sheet in the Premier League and should have won 4 or 5-0. He is addressing the criticism of his team. He seems, for a man at the top level in English football, an incredibly thin-skinned individual. But to answer your point about what needs to happen, Steve Bruce has to be sacked. This reminds us at Newcastle of a situation, a few years ago when Graham Souness was in the job and was equally unpopular, and the same things were put. You can't sack him. Who will take the job? Who will take the job? They had to get Glenn Roeder from the academy. Instant. I think he won 10 of his 13 Premier League games. Now that's not going to happen because we're not a very good team. But I think Bruce has fallen out with the players. We know he's fallen out with the players because, like you referenced before, Micah, it's hit the press. You've got players speaking to journalists saying the team don't train. To Chris's point earlier, they're never in. Days off. Danny Rose, when he was on loan at Newcastle last season, spoken to the press since, said he could not believe the number of days off he had at Newcastle United from training. There's reports this week they're not in training today. Already they're not in training tomorrow. So what is going on? This doesn't seem to be like a professional organisation under a professional coach at the top level. Alex,
we're going to have to move on. Thank you for giving us half an hour. Obviously, we've made you even more depressed on your Monday night now. I'm sure you had something lovely planned, but sorry about that.